The main issues related to social difference and how social difference affects food security. In general, these issues are not particularly well understood. The main reason is that there's actually a limited amount of research that's been done looking at the linkages between levels of food security and social difference. Also, food security is something that is very difficult to measure. There are many different ways of looking at food security, and the particular measures that you choose will affect the levels of food security that you assign to different social groups.
Different people experience food insecurity in different ways. So understanding how women in a household or children or elderly people experience food insecurity, and also how it's experienced differentially in different locations and how it's contextually understood.
In general, though, I'd say there are some patterns that emerge when you're looking at the linkages between food security and social difference. In general, households that are better educated, and I'm referring here mainly to sub-Saharan Africa, where my research is, households that are better educated tend to have higher levels of food security. Households that are led by men, or where a man is the recognised head of a household, tend to have higher levels of food security, whereas households that are led by women generally tend to have lower levels of food security. The reason for this, of course, being that in rural society, in sub-Saharan Africa, like many other societies in the world, there are systematic biases against women. So there's a whole complex set of gender issues there related to food security and social difference.
We farm at Pavenham near Bedford. We have a small family farm by today's standards of about 700 acres. On which I've just been joined from my son fresh from university. We come from a family business of woolen merchants founded in the 1840s that have been on the fringes of agriculture, but we have only been farming in our own right since the late 60s. We are coming under increased regulation for what we can use in the way of the agrochemicals that are available to us. We're, as I say, a traditional mixed farm with both beef and cereals. But we are getting limited more and more on the chemicals that are available to us, either through legislation or through the fact that manufacturers decide there isn't the profit margin to continue manufacturing them. And I think going forward, if we're wishing to retain the sort of traditional British landscape and the traditional British farmland, we're going to go full circle and go back to more livestock orientated farms in parts of the world, so that we have breaks from the traditional continuous cereal rotations. I think agriculture has a great future. I certainly wouldn't have allowed my son back into the farm if I didn't think so. I do have concerns for the small family unit, such as ours. When I came home, we purchased a little bit more land, and I took on some land on short-term tenancies, and at 700 acres I would have thought that we were fairly well placed for the future. I think if my son wants to derive a living from that farm into the future, he's going to have to specialise either in niche crops of some sort or other, or I suspect more likely he will look to expand upon the acreage that we currently farm. But I'm not totally convinced from an environmental and sustainable point of view that is good for the UK landscape. Traditionally, the family farm, you're not the owner of it, you're the custodian of it for the next generation. I think when you get into the agri-businesses, the land is a commodity like anything else, which is used to create the profit, and there is a subtle difference.
Critical issues for food insecurity in rural and urban households in Uganda. I think actually primarily you're talking about rural households and food insecurity. There are a set of issues. The first one relates to rural poverty, people's access to assets, low agricultural production, extremely poor extension services. The second issue relates to differences that you find in different parts of the country. You've had civil conflict, particularly in the north of the country, putting extreme pressure on household food security, if populations have had to move out of particular areas. You also have particular livelihoods related to, for instance, livestock production, particularly in the west of the country, and fish-based production around Lake Victoria and also around some of the riverine areas, and that, I'm told, is declining. So that puts pressure on food security.
One other issue for food security in sub-Saharan Africa is to recognise the importance of livestock. If you can give poor people a glass of milk a day or whatever, you're working wonders for their nutrition. If you just give them cereals, it's starch. We need to balance the diet. And so milk production and small-scale meat production, maybe with chickens or monogastric animals, things like pigs and so on, are very appropriate ways of enhancing human nutrition. And bear in mind that livestock are also crucial for crop production because they produce manure, they produce dung. They can't necessarily afford to buy fertilizer, but these animals are producing things. What happens to the manure? Do we put it on the fields? You can actually tether the animals in the fields, which will be used for crop production. And you don't even need to distribute the stuff. The animals do it for you. I remember seeing that once, and it was quite amusing. The animals had been eating mangoes. Now, we would think of mangoes in Europe as being very expensive, but they had more than they knew what to do with. So the animals were eating them. And what did I find in the field? Lots of mango stones. It was very funny. But those are things you can, integration of crops and livestock, and it is quite amazing what a difference it makes to the livelihoods of these people as well. Because give them some milk, they immediately start being able to sell it. Once you can start selling your output, you're immediately getting to the money you might need to feed your children, to send them to school, and all these other issues which they're facing.